chocolate? It must be Trafe. I'm going to tell your father. So my father sat us down. Abe had already gone to sleep. And he asked me, how did it ever come about that you were singing songs there and going to a place like that, which was for Christians and not for Jews? But he didn't give me a licking. He says, from now on, he says, I want you to promise that you will not go there anymore. And he told me why. He explained, you're a Jewish boy, and you don't have to sing Christian songs. And that was the end of it. So, but always, my brother Abe, I always took him to sell newspapers with me. Wherever I went, I took him. He used to tail after me. Well, when we came to Detroit, I was 15 and a half years old. My brother Abe and Fred and Frida, they went to school, they started school, and I went to work. Whatever money I made working, I used to bring home to my mother and give it to her. I didn't keep all the money for myself, but whatever I needed, I used to get from her. And I worked on construction work, on big buildings. And one day I fell about 37 feet. And I must have had a little hole in my skull, and I was bleeding. And we didn't have first aid on the jobs in those days. And a man came in with a chewing tobacco, did I tell you that?
Go ahead.
And he put it right on my head, and the pressure of the tobacco, that stopped the blood. Well, that day I finished working, but I couldn't climb anymore. I worked down below. I came home. I didn't tell my mother anything. I went to the bathroom and I washed my hair, and she didn't know that I even had blood on my hair because I wore a hat. And I didn't get up to go to work the next morning because I didn't feel good. And my father said, what's the matter with you? He wasn't used to me being in bed when I was supposed to go to work. And I told him, I says, I don't feel good today. Oh, he says, tell me. He said, it doesn't sound real. He says, tell me, why don't you feel good? Well, I didn't want to tell him that I fell, so I told him, I says, I got hurt at work. So he came and he found out where I was working because I told him. And one day, that next day that I felt better and went to work, I looked down from the top of the building and I could see that my father is standing there on the sidewalk looking up. He didn't say anything, but when I came home, he said to me, he said, he says, you've always, no. Then he called me by my, by my Jewish name, which he always did, but he always used to call me Yankel. That's my Jewish name, which stands for Yaakov. And this time he called me Yankele. When I knew that he called me Yankele, there was something that he was going to tell me. He said, you've worked and you've helped me save money and you helped me get on my feet financially. He says, now I want you to go back to school. Well, I got the feel of money, going around with older boys, and I became a good billiard player. I was a champion billiard player, and I always went for older than what I was, and I didn't want to go to school, but I said I'll go to night school. And he says, but I don't want you to work on this kind of work anymore, it's too dangerous. So I went and got a job at the Packard Motor Car Company. I came home and I said, I've got a job at the Packard Motor Car Company, and I'm going to go to night school. So he gave in, as long as I'm going to go to school. He says, but I don't want you working in a factory. Either go to school altogether or learn a trade. So I learned to be a plumber. And I worked as an apprentice for 3.5 years. I was supposed to work longer, but they allowed me to take my examinations for my license, and I became a plumber. And I started making much more wages than when I was only a helper. And then Grandma Ann and I, we became engaged, and we got married. And then
Tell us how
after,
you met Grandma Ann.
oh, how I met Grandma. Grandma was a twin, you know. She had a twin sister. And we used to go, and the girls used to go separate. The young boys in those days didn't date girls. So the girls used to go separate, and the boys went separate. And we knew Grandma Ann and her family because they lived across the street from us, catty corner, about 5 houses down. And when we got through dancing on Saturday night, we danced at the Temple Bethel. And they had dancing every Saturday night. So when the two girls used to go home, and they were alone, and I felt sorry for them, knowing the family, I said, "You're not going to go home alone. We're going to walk you home." And I had my friends with me, so we walked them home. And then we left them, and we used to go to the restaurant and eat pancakes. But we didn't treat them, because we only had, you know, it was unheard of in those days to treat a girl. When she became 17 years old, and Grandma, her mother, heard how nice I was to the girls, bringing them home to see that they're home safe. So she was giving a 17th-year birthday party for them. The girls didn't invite me to the party, but Grandma Kewell came over, and she said, "We're having a party at our house." She didn't tell me what, when, or who, and we want you to come to the party. So she liked me. In fact, later on, she really loved me. And because you're such a nice boy, then my father-in-law, Grandma Ann's father, called me aside and he said, "You're such a nice young man." He says, "You always bring my daughters home. You make sure that nobody hurts them. And I like you. Come back and see us again." So in the meantime, when I went to the birthday party and Grandma Ann was 17 years old, so we became a little better acquainted. And we started seeing each other a little more often. And we would go, and I would treat her to the movies, and then I would treat her to a soda when we came home because, you know, I worked and I had money. And we kept going and going and going till I became 22 years old and she was 19 and a half years old. And she worked also in a department store. And then my father-in-law once called me aside, I didn't tell you this, and he said, "Jacala," because my mother-in-law used to call me Jacala. Jacala, Annie was her name, but they called her Annie. Annie doesn't go with anybody, only with you, and she never went out for the date with anybody. Here you're going together and it's almost 3 years. What's going to be? I says, "What do you mean, Mr. Kewell, what's going to be?" He says, "Are you going steady? Are you serious?" I says, "No." I went home, and I told my father what he had said. And my father used to daven in the same synagogue as Mr. Kewell did. When they gave the honors of the Torah, they used to bid for them in the old days. And when he bid for a certain portion that he knew, my father always used to bid for. And when it came for him to be called up, he said, "No," he says, "it's not for me, it's for Mr. Cohn." So my father got his honor, and he treated him to it. Now when we got home from shul, from the synagogue, my father sat me down and he says, "What's going on between you and the Kewell family?" I says, "Oh, nothing." So he says, "But I heard," he says, "you've been going pretty steady with this girl for a long time." He says, "You know, she's a nice Jewish girl, and don't put her to shame, and just drop her like that." He says, "Do you like her?" He didn't say love. I says, "Yeah, I like her." "Do you go with any other girl?" I says, "No, only with her." He says, well, you better start thinking about what Mr. Keywell said. I think he wants you to be able to promise that you're gonna go with her only, and that someday, and there'll be nobody else. So one day I came home and Grandma Ann and I, we talked it over, that we should become engaged. But I didn't have enough money for a diamond ring. I don't know what we were gonna buy to be engaged. She says, I don't need a diamond ring. We'll just be engaged. I came home and I told my father and mother that I'm engaged. So my father said, how could you be engaged? Did you give her a ring? Or I says, no. He says, well, she's such a nice Jewish girl. We're going to buy a nice diamond ring for her, and she should have a diamond ring like a lot of other girls. So she had a diamond ring, and we were legally engaged. Now we have to set our time for a wedding. But I was only a plumber's helper that time. I was getting 90 cents an hour. So when my boss heard that I was engaged, he raised me to $1 an hour, and then a little later to $1.10 an hour. So then I told Grandma Ann, this is what I'm doing, and you can you're going to work at the department store, the Frank and Cedar store, and the two of us put the money together, we can make a living. So we got married. Now in those days, we didn't have lavish weddings. Everybody pitched in, and my mother and father did the cooking, because Grandma Keywell couldn't do it. She had little children, you know. And my father helped her with the cooking. Then I borrowed the truck from my boss, and I went and got the pot. And everything was all done, and we were married on a Sunday night. And we set up tables, and we had music. There was just a drum and a flute and an accordion. And everybody waited on tables. My brothers waited on tables, and my uncle waited on tables, and other people that we knew. And we had a nice wedding. Now I was supposed to go we were supposed to go for a honeymoon. And we had some money that we got for presents. We got $5 bills, $10 bills, $20 bills, and we accumulated a little bit of money that way. We didn't in those days we didn't have you know, before the wedding you have the you know what you
Shower?
for presents.
Shower.
A shower.
Yeah.
They didn't give showers in those days. Well, anyway, we got married, and my boss told me, he says, where are you going on your honeymoon? And I told him where I was going. He says, oh no, he says, you can't go to Cleveland. He says, go to Toledo, he says, because I'm going to need you, and don't be long on your honeymoon. So I was there overnight, and we came home. Because I had to be on that building to get the inspection, because I did the rough work on it. And the inspector was called, and I was there. So we didn't have a honeymoon. But before I went on a honeymoon, a week before we were married, I worked on Linwood, on stores and flats, and I fell from the second floor down to the basement, and I hurt my back. And my mother went and called the doctor, and the doctor came over the house, and he put wide tape on my back. And I went to work that week before the wedding, and I went on my honeymoon with that tape. And Grandma Ann said, you can't keep that tape on there. Look what it's doing to your skin. And even though it hurt, she says, I'm going to rip it right off. It's going to hurt. She ripped it off with some of the skin and all, and that was the end of my tape. We came home. We didn't have much of a honeymoon that night, believe me.
Tell when Grandma Barbie was born. You want to hear when Grandma Barbie was born?
Yeah.
Well, Grandma Barbara was born, and Grandma Ann had her home for well, they used to be in the hospital in those days 10 days. And when Grandma Barbara was born, and Grandma Ann came home with the baby. She was living at her mother's house, and she was about 14 days after having the baby, she got an attack, and she had to be rushed to the hospital for an operation for a gallbladder and an appendix in the same time. And in the meantime, she couldn't nurse the baby, so I used to have to go and get certain milk for the baby. And Grandma Ann was in the hospital for 3 weeks. And we brought her home. And we rented an apartment. And for the money that we get, and my father gave me some money, we bought furniture in the apartment. And we lived very happily ever after. We were married for 55 years. And when she passed away in 1982, no, 7 years ago, 81.
What do you want to say, Dana?
Dana, tell me, how did you enjoy listening to these stories? I know some of them are hard to believe because nowadays you have so many conveniences in your home. You have automobiles, and your parents are always ready to do for you and take for you, and they buy you nice clothes, and you have good bathrooms, which we never had. And it's a pleasure to have a granddaughter, great-granddaughter like you, because your mother is my granddaughter, and you are a great-granddaughter. And I love you. And I do very much. I love all my grandchildren.
Okay, turn it off.